You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Mike.
Well, it's a pretty exciting week. It's the final week of the pre-writ, Kate. Jesus,
We
like
are
Disneyland for political junkies.
cracking out the political advent calendars, getting ready for the countdown. The election is going to be called this Saturday in accordance with BC's fixed election day.
We think it'll be called on Saturday.
We think Saturday, October 19th. We're days away. This is also the week that local government officials from across BC converge upon Vancouver for the annual Union of BC Municipalities Convention. So we got some nice listening for folks warming up and traveling to that. Not only that, in the past week, Premier David Eby has announced 2 policy shifts on the carbon tax and involuntary care. We're certainly going to talk about those shifts and whether they're seismic shifts or subtle shifts in the strategy suite with Geoff. And certainly in our interview coming up with our next guest. Mike, would you like to introduce our guest?
Thanks, Kate. The man who would be premier. Today in the Hotel Pacifico, we're welcoming John Rustad, leader of the BC Conservative Party, a party that was shot out of a cannon in March 2023 when John took on the leadership. We're not sure where the cannonball is going to land on October 19th, but we do know that in its trajectory, it blew up BC United Party. John's no stranger to BC politics. He was first elected in 2005 as a BC Liberal in the riding of Prince George Dominica. He's been re-elected 4 times, a little bit further to the west now in the Chaco Lakes, which is a riding that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it runs from Vanderhoof from Fort St. James and moves west to around the Houston area, around there, and up to Grand Isle as well, I believe, for those checking the map. There have been a number of profiles written about this mysterious Mr. Rustad lately. You can check them out in the Vancouver Sun, written by Alec Lazenby, or Glacier by Rob Shaw, or you can check them out on Carol Taylor's Journal. A lot for a man who's been in politics for 19 years. We're only now really learning about who the real John Rustad really is. And today on Hotel Pacifico, we're hoping to learn a little bit more. John, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to be on here today.
Well, John, I want to give you the opportunity that we gave Sonia Furstenau and Premier Eby is tell us your elevator pitch to the voters.
Okay. Well, first of all, once again, thank you for having me on. The reality in British Columbia is 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia. We have a crisis in everything that you could possibly think about, whether it's resource sector, whether it's housing, whether it is crime, even in our finances. There is significant change that's needed in BC. We need to have a government in place that is going to bring hope, that's going to bring change, that is going to put people at the center of decision-making. The Conservative Party of British Columbia is set to do that with our policies and our approach and with our team to be able to deliver for people in British Columbia, to actually have people be proud to be British Columbians again in this province and build a future.
Let's pick up on there's lots there, and I mean I think you're pointing to a lot of things. You're picking up on there are a lot of things for voters to be bothered by right now, and the mood broadly, I'd say, is that voters are not happy with the trajectory of the province. Let's pick one then. Let's start, because I think we want to talk a bit about public safety, the mental health crisis and the addictions crisis. So can you tell us, particularly on the sort of question of how to care for people struggling with mental health and addiction, what's the big difference? What's the big shift? And I'm going to say, given that this is a problem that doesn't end at the borders of BC, what's the big shift that you're going to bring to address that issue?
Well, first of all, the approach that's been taken by David Eby has been disastrous, to say the least. The number of people that have died from overdoses in this province continues to skyrocket. The free drugs that are being paid for by taxpayers through this decriminalization and safe supply approach has not helped this situation. I was up in Campbell River just a short time ago, and there was one small blue flag for every boy and man that has died of an overdose since this crisis started. 12,000 flags on the lawn, and it is growing every month. Clearly, what we are doing in British Columbia is not working, and doing more of the same and expecting a different result is not going to change the outcomes. So our approach on this is to, like I say, to bring an end to decriminalization and safe supply. We need to build out everything from doctor prescribed treatment to short-term treatment and recovery to longer-term recovery for those that it's more than just getting off the addiction, but having to be able to help them with life skills to be able to fully integrate back into society. We need to look at involuntary care. Particularly, you're looking at a situation where if you're a parent of an 11-year-old daughter and your 11-year-old daughter is addicted, and you would want to do everything you can to be able to help that child get off the addiction and to be able to live a full life. Right now in British Columbia, if the child does not want to go into treatment and recovery, there is nothing you can do as a parent. And so we want to create the conditions where parents can do what's right for children in this province to be able to have treatment option for that child. And so that's part of the involuntary care that we would look at, and sort of a compassionate care, we would call it. Also, for example, if you've got somebody who has OD'd and is being brought back to life, clearly they are in a situation where they're not making the best decisions for their own lives. And I think, quite frankly, as a province, we should take on that responsibility to be able to help those people to get treatment, and to be able to go into recovery and to be able to come back, and back and engaging back in society. The next and sort of the last thing we need to do is we actually need to look at long-term care. There are many cases where people have significant brain damage from these drugs that are on our streets, as well as there's lots of issues, of course, associated with mental health associated with that, where people cannot function in our society. And I think it is wrong for our society to say it's okay for these people to be living on a street. It's okay for these people to live in those kind of conditions. I think that is wrong. We need, as a society, to be able to be compassionate and to be able to provide that long-term care. So those are the types of approaches that we're going to take. It's going to take time to build it out, but it is a way to be able to tackle the crisis and hopefully bring an end to the overdose deaths.
We've had Marshall Smith on this podcast in the past. I'm sure you're familiar with Marshall. And he was espousing the Alberta model. Do you look to Alberta as an example to follow for what we need to do here in BC, or are you planning to chart a more of a uniquely BC course of action on this issue?
I think we will take ideas from other jurisdictions that make sense. I have talked to Marshall Smith a number of times about what they're doing in Alberta. They've offered to help with anything that we would like in terms of the approach that we're considering in British Columbia. But we need to make sure that what we do in British Columbia can be custom and done, for the people here in the province. Even though Alberta is the same country, it's just on the other side of the mountains. Sometimes there are differences between the two areas in terms of certainly the approach that can be taken. The other piece I just want to quickly touch on, because I didn't touch on it before, is we may end up getting a challenge in terms of the involuntary compassionate care. We may end up getting a challenge from a Section 7 under human rights. If that were to happen, we would certainly argue the case with the judge that this is the right thing to do for people and it's the right thing to do in British Columbia. But if the judge disagrees with us, then we would have to consider using the notwithstanding clause. We need to be in a position to be able to do what's right for people in British Columbia, and that should not be prohibited by a judge making a policy.
And what I was wondering, because I was going to ask, like and David Eby, Premier David Eby did this week say he'd move on from involuntary care. So you're articulating that you'd go further with that and have the appetite to go further with that. Like that's the difference between the two of you.
Well, the other thing you might say about David Eby and his approach is, for years, they've had 7 years to do this and they haven't done it. So suddenly now they're planning to do it. Mike Farnworth has said, well, we want to make sure we get it right. So my perspective is that mean they have had it wrong for 7 years? Certainly from my perspective, that's obviously the case. And it's nice to see them shifting, but can you really trust somebody who's flip-flopping around on policy ideas like that to actually be able to implement things and get it and do it properly here for British Columbia?
Can you help me understand, like, what's the difference between a flip-flop and, like, I guess I'll call it like being open to being open-minded and open to persuasion from voters? And I'll say, like, we can look at your record on carbon tax as an example, and you've had differences of different views and sort of what you took in cabinet when you voted for and supported the carbon tax, or we can look at UNDRIP, right? Like, where's the difference between a flip-flop and sort of being open to evolving a position?
I look at it this way. David Eby because they've had years to implement this, they haven't even signaled that this was something they would consider. Matter of fact, they were voted and spoke against doing this type of approach. And so now suddenly they're shifting on the eve of an election. So I get that, they're responding in terms of where the public is, but the public was there last year. The public was there 2 years ago. The public was there 4 years ago in terms of what needed to be done. And he obviously was not prepared to listen to the public then. So the only thing that is different today is that we are in the middle of an election and the NDP are, neck and neck with us. Some would say maybe behind us in the polls. We have a tremendous amount of momentum building. And I think, quite frankly, they're very worried about this upcoming election. So they're looking to policy shift. I get that they want to run against their own government with their policies, but, I think the people out there in the public will see it for what it is.
So, John, well, obviously you and I, we're part of the same movie for a little while as in the BC Liberals, and you served 12 years in the BC Liberal government, for them in cabinet. Looking back on that time, like how you're in a different place now, but how do you characterize the BC Liberal record that you were part of when you look back on it? And do you,
sorry, Mike,
the good and the bad?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some things, quite frankly, I think that were good. There's a lot of things, both from Gordon Campbell as well as from Christy Clark, that I think, have some good things about it. There's some things, obviously, I disagreed with, and hindsight's easier to look at than perhaps, at the time. And I'll look at, things like healthcare, for example, and I'm going to step back even a little bit further. During the 1990s, the NDP controlled healthcare spending by reducing the number of doctors, and that had unintended consequences. So today, now we have a shortage of doctors. And during my time with the BC Liberals in 2012, there was a decision to refocus our advanced education on the needs of the day. And we reduced the number of nurses that we're training, and now we have a shortage of nurses. These are unintended consequences that happen from policies that you really only can look back on from a perspective of, did it work or did it not work? And I look at the carbon tax as being one of those. The carbon tax was revenue neutral. It was reductions in income taxes. My perspective is I like the idea of consumption taxes over income taxes. I think that's a better way to go. However, the other piece that I supported and sort of associated with the carbon tax was the idea of overall pricing of carbon and the ability to be able to use credits to really enhance our forest sector. None of that came about. And it wasn't very long before the carbon tax was no longer neutral and started to just be a revenue generator for government. And perhaps I was naive at the time when I looked at it, but what it has become today, which is basically just a tax grab, makes no sense whatsoever, which is one of the reasons why, you look back and you think there were good ideas and approaches at the time. Some of them have worked out well. Some of them, have had unintended consequences.
Well, so is that why, because I'm looking actually over your shoulder and there's the scrap the carbon tax poster. And I'm wondering why is that the position as opposed to as you're pointing to sort of amending it and making it more what its original intent was?
We have a crisis in British Columbia, and the crisis is called affordability. And I started off talking about the fact that 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 3 British Columbians are thinking about leaving. People are struggling to put food on the table and to pay their rent. They haven't got many people have no hope to be able to buy a home. And they ask themselves, how can I raise a family? And so when you look at things like the carbon tax, first of all, taxing people into poverty is not going to change the weather. And so I look at it from a perspective of how can we provide relief for people on a day-to-day basis? There are 3 things you need to survive in this province. You need food, you need a place to live, and you need energy. And government, unfortunately, is significantly taxing all 3 of those and significantly having cost factors on all 3 of those. The carbon tax feeds into everything, every one of those components. The carbon tax needs to be removed to help relieve some of that pressure on affordability. There's additional tax relief that needs to be done as well, but that's the conclusion I came to when I looked at the carbon tax. It hasn't reduced our reliance on hydrocarbons. It hasn't reduced our per capita use of hydrocarbons, but it has significantly increased the cost with this approach. And so it doesn't make sense, like I say, doing more of the same and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And there's no point carrying on with the carbon tax that is not working.
John, let's imagine November, and you're being sworn in as Premier of the province, and you're at the government house on Rockland Drive, whatever it is. And Von Palmer is in your face, and he's saying, what is the first budget of John Rustad government going to look like when you have to grapple with, as you know from your years of experience, trade-offs? I don't believe you're promising to balance the budget in the first year, but I think you're indicating you would try to move it towards a better fiscal position. You want to fix healthcare. You want to make life more affordable. What is the overarching vision here to make all this work, to move BC forward in your vision, when a lot of these goals that I think all parties want to accomplish are often in conflict with each other?
Yeah, and I often say that the number one rule in economics is supply and demand, and there will almost always be more demand than there is supply. The number one rule in politics, unfortunately, by many parties, is to ignore the number one rule in economics and just promise everything to everybody. And that's obviously, something that doesn't work, and it usually doesn't end well. So clearly, we're not going to be able to get to a balanced budget right away. It's going to take a lot of hard work to be able to do that. We have a $9 billion deficit. I would not be surprised if it was 10 billions plus, maybe even 11 or 12 billion by the time we get to March. This government has overestimated all of the economic outcomes, like all of the indicators that you could think of, whether it's GDP or whether it's employment or whether it is resource revenues, et cetera. So it's going to be tough to be able to grapple with that deficit. There's no question. Getting rid of the carbon tax and other significant tax relief that I'm looking to do is going to only add pressures on that. There's only one full way out of that, and that is to be able to grow the economy. And that, as you know, does not happen overnight. You have to set the conditions for that to be able to happen. But for example, we have 17 mines in this province that are either permitted or about to be permitted. That would represent a $38 billion investment, generate between 20 and 30,000 jobs with an average wage and benefit of 138,000 a year, and add over 800 billion to British Columbia's GDP over the life of those mines. We have to get these things up and running. We've got to get out of the way as government and get these projects started in British Columbia. Companies need to be able to have a reasonable expectation for return. Same sort of thing with our forest sector. Our forest sector is being decimated. Quite frankly, it'll be surprising if there's very many mills operating at all by August of next year. We need to be able to get a foundation there. We need to be able to rebuild that economy in British Columbia. So that's a big piece of that we're going to have to be focused on and laser focused as a government, getting the bureaucracy and the process out of the way and allowing our economy to be able to take root. Now, along with that, we're going to have to look at obviously some spending. Government has, running a massive deficit, like I say, 9 billion now, likely higher. They've significantly added to the public service. And can anybody point to anything that is better in this province under David Eby? And I can't point to a single thing that would be better. And so obviously there's a lot of money being spent that you kind of wonder, does it need to be spent there? And I'll give you one example. Germany has twice the population of Canada, but Canada has 10 times as many administrators in health. We have close to 40% of our nurses are administrators in British Columbia. There are significant opportunities to look at improving healthcare by utilizing some of those dollars and by freeing up nurses to be able to provide frontline services. So that's just one small example, but it's an important example in what is the largest budget within government.
How would you approach taking on those challenges to restructure government, to put more into the front line, or however you would characterize it? I mean, there's a lot of big policy pieces that would have to be moved to reallocate resources. Do you envision bringing in a whole team of advisors, or do you have in mind how you would energize your policy arm to do those things? Or would you be just doubling down on the existing provincial public service to find the solutions from within there? Like, because as you know, from within government, it's somebody's got to do it, right? Somebody's got to think it and somebody's got to do it.
Yes. So I think the key there is, I mean, I've got a lot of respect for the public service, and I worked well with them in my time when I was a minister and MLA within government. But But we are going to need to bring in some people from outside to take a good, long, hard look at what is happening within government and spending. It's hard to ask people who have spent years building a system to take a critical look at it because they have a bias, obviously, because they've built it. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of bringing some people in, working with the public sector and doing reviews of these things. For example, many of the things that I look at in Clean BC, some of the spending programs that are in there, you look at and you really wonder, are they achieving the results? Is that just a slush fund for government? Do we need to be doing that? I also look, for example, at BC Housing. There's many things that are going on in BC Housing that I just shake my head at. I think, how could this actually be happening? Hotels, for example, that are being purchased and flipped to BC Housing for huge profits over short time frames. It makes you wonder, what is the priorities? How is this happening within government? So there is a lot of digging that needs to be looked at in terms of government spending.
Where do you look for your ideas or your policy ideas? Are there kind of other leaders within Canada or internationally you're looking at for models, or are there particular kind of go-to, like, what are you reading? What are you listening to? Where are your ideas coming from?
Well, a lot of the ideas in terms of the work we're doing, I talk out with our team, but much of it, quite frankly, is from my years of experiencing and talking and engaging with people and engaging with various groups around the province about their issues, and looking at what the potential solutions are, coming back and talking to people about those. I'm not particularly enamored with looking at any other jurisdiction, whether Canada or the world, in terms of what they're doing. But I'm not interested in, at the same time, in reinventing the wheel if there's something that does make sense. And that's why when we look at healthcare, I'm looking at European models that are universal healthcare, but they're delivered by both government and non-government agencies. And the focus is on the patient and not the system itself. So we'll look at those type of models and say that makes sense for British Columbia. It's something we can do under the Canada Health Act. Why wouldn't we want to embrace a system that is far superior to the one that we have? And quite frankly, is more cost effective.
You mentioned earlier wanting to get the mines going, wanting to get forestry going again. You also have taken what some think is a controversial position of kind of going back on earlier support of DRIPA. And there's been some commentary about, where you stand on the HIDA agreement as well, just to make the point that there are different points of view. Now, if you come into government and want to move these initiatives on the land base forward, are you concerned at all about conflict from First Nations? And, obviously there's a divergence of opinion within First Nations about moving forward on economic agreements or not. Your riding includes the Wet'suwet'en area. That was a site of much conflict over the Coastal GasLink pipeline. But how would you kind of try to move forward on that agenda while limiting conflict?
That's a very good question, and it'll take a little bit to go into it, but it's a very important question to actually discuss. So my perspective on working with First Nations from my years as minister and from working with various sectors around the province is First Nations want just like what everybody else wants. They want the ability to be able to build a future. They want to be able to buy houses. They want to be able to make sure their kids have good education, have opportunities to build, their futures. And they also want, recognition. What we're seeing with government today, with the DRIPA legislation and the process, is it's working from a government to government level, but it's not working from a people to people level. And it's creating friction in British Columbia from one people to another. The solution for all the First Nations issues can't be to take from one group and give it to another. The solution has to be how you add economic opportunity and benefit and make sure that First Nations have that opportunity to fully participate, engage, and benefit from it, but non-Indigenous benefit as well, so that both get an opportunity to be able to see the fruits of these sort of investments and potential in British Columbia. So we will repeal the DRIPA legislation. It's something that, like I say, is creating friction. And to me, reconciliation is not about creating friction. Reconciliation needs to be about bringing people together. We'll continue to use UNDRIP as a guiding principle in how we work with First Nations, but we're going to be very focused on what we call economic reconciliation, where we work with First Nations to create those opportunities for First Nations to be able to engage in their potential, whether that's tourism or whether that's industrial or whether that's commercial, whether that might be residential. It could be mining, it could be forestry, it could be oil and gas. There could be all kinds of opportunities for First Nations to be able to fully engage and participate in economic opportunity. So that's where we're going to be focused on. We're going to look at the idea of land strategically from a perspective of returning land to First Nations, and to help create and foster those economic potential within the province. When it comes to the Haida issue, a lot's been said about it. My perspective is I fully support Haida title. Haida, we're going to win a court case that was going to be fought. But the question mark is, how do you address private land and infrastructure? And in my opinion, title land should never have been defined underneath private land and infrastructure. And I'll explain why. With the agreement that's in place, for Haida law will apply to Haida title land. That means Haida law will apply to private land. Haida law will decide whether there should be taxation. Haida law will decide what you can and can't do with your property. And you as an individual cannot vote for a government. You cannot vote for the body that makes those decisions. So that's now potentially taxation without representation. In addition to that, then the impact to obviously private property rights could be potentially huge. But in addition to that, from the Silcotin case, there's a requirement for accommodation because First Nations have the right to benefit from title land. And where that right is infringed or impeded by a government, there is an accommodation that's required. And clearly private land and infrastructure would prevent a First Nation from benefiting from that land. And so that means that accommodation be required. And you might think, well, it's not that much land up in Haida Gwaii, it wouldn't be a big deal. But imagine what the compensation would be like for downtown Vancouver or Victoria or any of our other cities in this province. And just to play that out further, there's the Shuswap group of nations that have claimed a title case from north of Quesnel to south of Kamloops, from Highway 16 all the way out to the Alberta border, and all the communities and all of the infrastructure and everything that's within it. We're going to have to take a serious look at an engagement with the Haida people.
We had a camera freeze there for a second, John, but I think we got most of it.
Sorry,
but let me somewhat. We heard you. We're not sure whether the gremlins were there, but basically, if I could summarize, part of your concern on the Haida agreement would be as a precedent to other First Nations settlements. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And implications for private land. Yeah.
Yeah, the implication on private land, the potential for accommodation, the impact that would have, on British Columbia, quite frankly, it would bankrupt British Columbia if you had to deal with accommodation for something like downtown Vancouver. And so there needs to be a lot of work there to be able to make sure that we can bring life to what they're trying to do with title, but also make sure that we are making decisions that are in the interest of all British Columbians on behalf of all British Columbians.
I just want to shift gears a little here, John. Obviously, since March 2023, BC Conservatives have been on a meteoric rise. Probably define your own expectations, maybe not. Maybe you had every belief this was going to happen exactly the way it's turned out. But it's with few precedent in history. You have to go back to W.A.C. Bennett in 1952 to see a party that's come out of nowhere to potentially govern the province. So given that short time that this has all come together and you've had to build a party infrastructure and an apparatus, and your caucus has gone from 2 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 9, you might end up governing in November. And do you have a transition team? Are you ready? Is the team ready? How can you assure government that the BC Conservatives are up to the job if they get elected?
Well, first of all, I would say this about the current NDP. With all of the crisis we have, they are not fit to govern, and that's pretty clear from my perspective. They have created just huge messes. We have a lot of very, very good people. All of our candidates come from very interesting backgrounds. We have CEOs, we've got chief financial officers, we've got lawyers, we've got doctors, we've got farmers, we've got engineers, we've got people from right across the political spectrum, right across the skill sets from around the province. And so we've got a very good team that's ready to step in and to be able to implement the policies and approaches that the Conservative Party wants to bring for British Columbia. As you know, there's lots of work that needs to be done behind the scenes in case we're in that honorable situation of forming a government. And so there is some of that work that is going on, but I'm solely focused at this point on making sure that we do everything we can to be able to win this election come October 19th.
And how many of your candidates are women?
I don't know. At one point, it was close to 50% of our candidates, and I've actually lost track.
I think you're at about 25.
Okay, thank you. That's good. I guess I have 25.
Because I'm the geek who counts these things.
So that's the Mike McDonald nerdery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Are you gonna get to 50? Are you gonna yeah?
Oh, you're
No,
no,
you're done.
Like if
You're done.
can we
We've
get
got
you
a full
in
slate
there?
now. We got
Okay,
90
okay.
candidates
Well,
now.
okay. Yeah. So you're done. So you're I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it's just shy of 30. I mean, would you look at any of that gender balance in cabinet? Can we talk about racial representation, anything like that?
Look, from my perspective is I want the best people to do the job. And that's what we've tried to do with selecting candidates. It wasn't about meeting some sort of quota or requirement. We were just looking for good people that could step up to the plate, that are going to do a good job fighting for their riding, representing their riding, and that could also, be very strong in terms of representing what we need to do as a Conservative Party. So when we look at should we have that on our forming government? When we look at things like cabinet, of course, we're going to be looking for the various skill sets that we need. We're going to be looking for all the balances, that we need regionally to make sure we've got good representation there. I'm not going to particularly be looking to count noses one way or the other in terms of any ethnic backgrounds or any other sort of thing. It's more about making sure that we've got good people that are going to be able to do the job that we need to have done.
Your deal with Kevin Falcon came together seemingly quickly, even though there have been discussions for many months. Famously, did not happen in May when a deal was put on the table, but it did happen in late August. Since then, about 5 BC United MLAs are running as independents, and there's others, BCU candidates running as independents. Are you happy that the deal has had a net positive for the Conservatives, or are you concerned about collateral damage from the deal?
And I always knew that bringing the two parties together would not be easy with the process. And, this is why we were unable to be able to reach agreements when we started first having some discussions, or tried to have discussions back last December. And we tried again in February, then of course in May, and they ultimately did come together quite quickly within just a couple of days at the end of August. The issue, of course, is there are some philosophical differences between, but also, they had close to 50 candidates. We had, I think, about 83 candidates at the time. Putting all that together is not easy. You're going to have lots of conflict. Everybody would like to run. Everybody feels like they've been let down or that they've been passed over, and they feel that they're the better candidate. All of these things happen. I understand it entirely. What Kevin did, though, in deciding not to run, withdrawing or suspending their campaign, not running candidates, and throwing the support behind the Conservative Party, was to put the needs of the province first. We have a government that's been very destructive. Their policies, they're very radical approaches in this government. It's driven by ideology. The future of this province is at stake. And I know that sounds cliche because all elections are like that, but we really are at a crossroads in this province in terms of the approaches, whether it's the Lands Act that David Eby has said he's going to wait till after the election to do, whether it's what they're doing on other things with the First Nations, whether it is their very destructive policies on resources, and even with the carbon tax, where they say they're going to get rid of the consumer side of the carbon tax, but they're going to more than double what it will be on the industrial side, which impacts trucking, it impacts agriculture, impacts everything that we do, which ultimately just is going to pass down to the consumer in terms of cost. These things are all very destructive for the province of British Columbia. So Kevin looked at it and went, we need to do everything we can to try to prevent this NDP government from winning. So that's why he threw the support behind the Conservative Party. Now, all the post that didn't work out exactly the way that either of us had hoped, right? I mean, in terms of candidates and process that we went through, but we offered about 12 of their members, 12 of their people positions. Not all of them accepted. I think we took 7, 8, or 9. I can't remember exactly what the count was. Mike, you're the numbers person. You probably have the exact count.
I'll give you a full report later.
Yes.
But in the press conference you did with Kevin, he said in trying to reassure BC United supporters, he said he had line of sight to things that were happening in the Conservative campaign. Is he continue to play a role? Is he going to be advising in some way, shape, or form going forward?
Well, we have had some discussions, obviously, going through this process. There's a number of other pieces that I welcome input from, whether it's Kevin or from other people within the organization that have come over and that are helping us. And so there's quite a bit of integration between many of the people that have been involved in the United Party and that are now involved with us as the Conservative Party. So there's lots that is there. I think the one thing to touch on is the independents that are running. I get the frustration of why they're running, but clearly they don't share the same values that Kevin and I did in striking the agreement that we did reach.
Well, I think what a lot of them are saying is that, they feel like there's a center that's missing, and they're trying to represent that. Maybe just to give you a chance to respond to that. I mean, how much do you see yourself as center right? And actually, can I couple that with, like, what is the BC Conservative Party? Like, what space is it going to occupy? I mean, it's kind of this amazing story. You sort of went to the political brand thrift store, resurrected this thing, and suddenly we're very realistically looking at you potentially forming government. So what is the BC Conservative Party?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that question. I should maybe just say next question, but no, I will try to answer it. So, I mean, first of all, the Conservative Party of BC is the oldest party in BC's history. It was first founded around 1903. When I think about what we are as a party, look, we have a former NDP MLA running for us. We've got the former leader of the Green Party and working with us and supporting us in many of our positions. We have federal Liberals running for us. We've got federal Conservatives running for us. We've got, quite frankly, a larger coalition than I think I've seen from any other political party. I mean, Gordon Campbell put an amazing coalition together leading into 2001. But in many ways, we've got a broader coalition than even what he had put together. And it's why I say, as the Conservative Party, it's not about being conservative or liberal or NDP or Green. It's just standing for what's right and fighting for the average everyday person. That's sort of at the core of what we are trying to do. Obviously, many of those perspectives come from a conservative values and a conservative approach. But there's many components across there that aren't just relying on one political brand.
I'd like to ask a more probing and penetrating question. I understand that you can quote Monty Python at length. Can you give us a little sample of this, or is this fake news?
Don't make me bring out the holy hand grenade, okay?
Is this why you have a parrot?
The dead parrot.
Is it dead or alive?
Yeah. I'm sorry. That's just not a good line. My parrot is very much alive.
He's not resting.
Yeah.
And your parrot's name, I can't remember your parrot's name.
Biardi.
Biardi. So, are we going to see Biardi during the election campaign?
Well, it's interesting to say that. I actually won't bring Biardi on tour. I think the flight would be far too long for the bird on its wings these days. But however, having said that, there has been an interview that I did with Global Television where they came to my house and they did a little piece on Biardi. So people are going to get to know a little bit more about
most famous parrot in British Columbia pretty soon. If you are premier, will Biardi live in the premier's office?
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't want to be asking staff to look after a pet like Biardi.
Could have some
Although,
hot takes on cabinet ministers coming in and out the door by the sounds of it,
you
if the
know,
parrot can
that's the other
swear.
thing. As you know, you have many confidential meetings in the Premier's office, and the bird is quite good at tattling from time to time. So that might not be the best approach to
Might be
have.
on retainer with government relations agencies, perhaps.
You know, I'm not sure if the bird would be willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like he's a very opinionated bird from my intel. But
Well,
anyways,
I'll tell you a little story about Biardi, and you know, she comes up with these just amazing things, amazing lines. She was walking on around on the floor one day, and there was this stream of sunlight that was coming in through the window, and she stopped in the sunlight. She closed her eyes and she said, "Biardi, happy bird, sunshine." It's an amazing bird, like what she comes up with.
They're very smart. How
Yeah,
old is she?
incredible. She's 31 now.
Wow.
wow.
Yeah.
I owned a cockatoo for what 3 weeks, and it was a 3-year-old cockatoo. They told us it was going to live to it was 90, and it just we
It
didn't get
didn't.
along. It just I wasn't cut out for a 50 to 60 year relationship with this bird. So I trust Biardi is a little more well-tempered than the beast that I cohabitated with briefly.
All right. I want to thank John Rustad for joining us at Hotel Pacifico and trudging through some really difficult technical difficulties. We'll have to have him back again sometime at the hotel where the 5G connectivity is fantastic. We're going to use this space this week to report on a growing problem, guests, that poses a real and present danger. The issue is copper theft. And I want to talk about it not only on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, who quite obviously has a vested interest in all of this, but also as a public service message. Here's what's happening out there. Because of the rising price of the metal, more and more thieves are targeting copper wiring and other copper components from utility poles, substations, and construction sites. Then they resell it. That causes widespread havoc. Just imagine for a moment. You're at home and your loved one starts experiencing a sharp pain in their chest. You pick up the landline, no dial tone. You rush for your cell phone thinking you'll have service, but there isn't any. And it's not just 911 services that can go dark from copper theft. A lack of connection can stop your business dead in its tracks or even delay submitting your homework assignment on time. This, of course, leads to costly repairs to the infrastructure, broader power outages, which compromises our emergency services and creates dangerous conditions for utility workers and the public, and an economic burden that extends beyond the price of repair. There are opportunity costs that impact local economies as well as increased operating costs. So, pretty clear it's a serious problem, one that requires a multifaceted, collaborative approach to address effectively. From a public point of view, be vigilant in a common sense way. If you see suspicious activity around areas with copper infrastructure, report it to authorities. Do not confront thieves directly. And talk to others about how copper theft impacts public safety and infrastructure. From a policy point of view, strengthened legislation is going to help mitigate the issue. From a TELUS point of view, they're investing in increased drone surveillance and predictive software, other measures too. And they thank you, guests, for listening.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Good to see you, Geoff. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Yeah.
Woo.
Good interview with Mr.
Thanks.
Rustad.
Yep. Yep. Pretty consistent in his positions and pretty game to talk about the parrot.
He is that parrot brings joy to his life. Clearly,
Mhm.
much the way
Clearly, he lit up.
if I was to spend the podcast talking about my cat, I would be much the same. I would brighten up.
It's true. People are like that with their
cat
I'm
pets.
very excited actually that our listeners, well, our viewers, hopefully, I think on our daily coverage starting next Monday, September 23rd, I believe it'll be on YouTube as well. Our viewers will be able to see us all in our pajamas as we record very early in the morning to provide our daily podcast audience with an episode later in the morning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're all very excited and somewhat scared about this experience we're about to have. And this daily episode, which we're going to try to pull off, will be about a half hour. So it's not the usual blockbuster length that Hotel Pacifico episodes have been known for. It's going to be a very
No.
manageable, bite-sized portion to fit into your day.
Hotel Pacifico shorts.
That's right.
Digestible on your morning commute, perhaps to UBCM.
Like a croissant and a coffee to go.
Featuring
Within
all
a
of our
30-minute
dependents.
commute.
Within a 30-minute commute, probably featuring
It's
all of
like
our dependents.
Hotel Pacifico,
And
renting rooms by the hour. Or
yeah,
half
Okay,
hour.
yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
put you guys in a bad spot, but my quality pledge to our listeners is not to be in my pajamas.
Well, you probably
Uh,
wear your blazer to bed.
Exactly.
You're
No,
very
no,
formal.
no.
You're very formal.
Yeah, actually, that's true. I'm sure, yeah, you're like a button-up pajama person, Geoff. I'll throw a blazer over mine so no one will know the difference. It'll be
Okay.
great.
All right.
All right. We're looking forward to it, guests, and I hope you'll join us for our daily election coverage. Geoff, now that we have you back, actually, Geoff and Mike, I want to check, are you guys at UBCM this week?
I thought I might go down and see Premier Eby, but generally no. It's looks like a very interesting agenda this time. It's always very interesting, but this is a particularly critical one, and every issue they're going to talk about is, I would say, of provincial scope. So from the standpoint of people who may think that they talk about pothole filling and where to get a deal on VisVas or something like that, that's not what the discussions
Now,
are
Brad
about.
West
So-
is very excited about the pothole filling discussions, I'm told.
Well, they're a global leader in pothole filling in his community. I get that. But what they're discussing at the UBCM is addiction, homelessness, housing approval, a lot of big picture issues. And I think just looking at the program, they've brought in a lot of very interesting speakers. So as usual, I think Mike will agree, two things for provincial politicians. It's the AAA league of BC politics, with provincial politics being the major league.
Mhm.
And these are people who enjoy politics for the most part and like it, and are on a week off with nothing at stake. So the second part of the UBCM is that the speech that a provincial leader gives to the UBCM, in my opinion, is the toughest they give all year, because the audience is 1,000 people who are very, very engaged and are not just listening for policy, but looking for performance. And so it's a stressful time. Which was interesting to see Mr. Rustad say that they're proposing to reduce the speaking time and put it into Qs and As, which many, I think, politicians find a friendlier setting, and some audiences like it better too. So it'll be very interesting to see how that discussion
You
concludes.
can always tell who the political staffers are at a UBCM speech because they're the ones clapping.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah, and
remind
the
me,
caucus
Geoff,
members are in the front row.
Remind me, Geoff, did the 2020 election fall just after UBCM? Did John Horgan have to do a sort of quick
Well, I think it was
pre-writ?
still pretty virtual. There
Oh,
was a
that's
gap there, but
right.
I could be wrong about that. But
No, that's
this
right.
is so many things now are coming back to what the pre-pandemic kind of style was. I mean, you see that in film festivals and entertainment and so on, but now I think we're seeing it at the political level, and it's going to change the dynamic of this election, because the 2020 election was very much arm's length in terms of voter contact.
Mhm.
So, now people who have not been asked to volunteer since 2017 are getting phone calls and being asked to volunteer, and maybe they're saying yes, maybe they're not. We'll see what happens.
Well, it will be a busy week with all the shenanigans with UBCM and lots of receptions in the evening and lots of political people chattering away all week. And amidst all this busyness, we might sneak in a little bonus episode of Hotel Pacifico this week. Stay tuned.
Ooh,
Which
I
will
love
be
a
very-
bonus episode.
It will be very geared to the granularity of the provincial election coming up.
Oh,
And,
this is your place to shine, Mike McDonald.
it's a deep cut episode. So I'm hoping we can pull it off. If it doesn't, please don't hold it against me. But hopefully, there's a little.
We should maybe have a listener contest to name the 3 most critical bellwether polls across all of polls, not constituencies, across all of. Because Mike, you would know
Polls.
the answer.
Polls, yeah.
Which polls have always voted correctly, that kind of thing,
Oh well, that
I'm talking
sounds
about
like
a poll on the ground, not opinion poll, not an opinion poll.
Yeah, like an
Yeah,
actual yes, a poll, like a polling division. So,
Correct. Yeah.
excellent.
can we come
So
back to Mr. Rustad,
yes,
if I may?
Yes.
you would.
It's very
Yes, you may.
interesting discussion, and I thought it was great that he spent so much time, and this leads naturally from the UBCM, because they are discussing reconciliation there and relations with First Nations. It's a critical question for municipalities on a whole number of fronts, so I'm sure it'll come up. And I was just thinking about how when I returned to politics with John Horgan in 2017, how amazed I was about the very, very broad consensus about reconciliation, which was brand new to me in the business community and at UBCM and at places where it was a contested issue. And when John Rustad talks about repealing DRIPA, which is something that a lot of voters probably are not very familiar with, he's talking about repealing legislation that passed in 2019 with his support that was unanimous in the legislature. It was seen as a watershed by First Nations and not as an import of some kind of United Nations inspired woke agenda, but as practical tools to start to recognize what the courts were telling us. So what Mr. Rustad is forecasting in his platform now is to repeal that bill, which was the only unanimous bill that I saw pass, except absolutely mundane stuff, and reopen the whole question, including the transfer of lands. And he wasn't clear, I thought, where these lands would come from to First Nations. It didn't sound like a treaty process. And replace it with what? And I think that there's a set of big, important questions to be asked here in the debate to come about what that will mean for BC's economy for a politician who's saying he wants to create certainty and wants to create economic opportunity. Because I have not heard, maybe I don't get out enough, I haven't heard anybody in the business community saying we should repeal DRIPA. And I don't think people have really taken on board how dramatic and profound that kind of shakeup would be. That's not a policy change in a small way. It touches every First Nation in the province. And his discussion also about private property and the idea that somehow the compensation would have to be found for all of Vancouver is completely out of step, if not totally wrong. Like the First Nations here in Vancouver have made it crystal clear for years that they are not looking for that kind of an arrangement. And in fact, have been receiving transfers of land, which they're using to do some of the largest developments in the city, some just a few blocks from my place here, where the Squamish First Nation has got 3 towers out of 11 going up on a piece of land they recovered as part of a legal action. So I think we're going to hear a lot about that issue because it touches on so many profound questions right across the province, from downtown to rural BC.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, part of this is the fortitude by which a new government will stick to its election positions. And
they might flip-flop on this, you mean? I don't think so. He was very
clear. Flip-flop or become persuaded, listen to voters.
Well, I mean, if they're prepared to go walk through the along the the flaming whatevers, and scorch their
flaming
soles
coals
of their feet
and
or
scorch the
more.
soles of their
Flaming
feet.
coals, thank you.
Own
Flaming
the
coals.
metaphor, yeah. Own the metaphor.
I was thinking like flaming stones. No. Flaming coals. If they're prepared to do that and take their lumps, I guess that's what they're going to do. But I know that having gone through Gordon Campbell government first term on referendum on Aboriginal treaty principles, that it's a bruising process when those issues are litigated publicly. And while on one hand there's unease with certain parts of the public today about, as evidenced by the Land Act discussion, there will be unease if conflict arises from taking action on some of those things.
Well,
So
I think the other
ahead.
contradiction on this, though, just briefly, Kate, is that
Yeah.
he mentioned in his discussions about the economy, there's 17 mines permitted and ready to go. That's great news. That means that the reconciliation process has largely been working because they're ready to go. And the mining industry is one that historically despised the New Democrats, but more recently has been getting along pretty well. Now, somebody will be phoning in this minute to say that's completely wrong, but the reality is that mining has been advancing, including in partnership with First Nations around the province because of critical minerals and a host of other things. So I thought it was interesting that he mentioned that in almost the same
But not
breath as
necessarily
talking
because of
about the
DRIPA, though,
economic.
Geoff. I mean, those
Pardon me?
mining deals would have happened irrespective of DRIPA, I would argue.
Well, they happened with DRIPA in place. Maybe
With and
irrespective.
without, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of them were with the DRIPA provided certainty in the Tall-Tan arrangements that were made last year. It was certainly a very different framework that was used from what had been happening in the past. The Haida agreement as well, although it'll be very interesting to see if something as arcane as the Haida Agreement becomes an issue. But basically, the amount of private sector land on Haida Gwaii, which is the two islands that we used to call the Queen Charlotte Islands, is very small. And it sounds odd when Mr. Rustad describes it that law would apply. Haida law could have an impact in private locations, but it depends on what law he's talking about. And in fact, we have parallel jurisdictions, provincial and federal law, working together all the time in the same area, including healthcare and so on. Or you look at the Nisga'a territory, where there is private sector land and it's a treaty process, and both jurisdictions operate. Sechelt First Nation has self-government. It has some jurisdictional issues. It's a lesser level, I would argue, or a different level from the Nisga'a. So for a previous Aboriginal rights minister to say, I'm going to rip up everything that I saw happen during my time here and speak knowledgeably about the critical legal decisions that created the context for DRIPA is interesting and critical. It should be a huge election debate. We'll see if it is.
Well, and somehow pluck out economic reconciliation from within broader reconciliation. Like it all feels a bit opaque. But can we move from walking across hot coals to flip-flops? Because I think it's an important point. I think we can relate it to John Rustad and the shift from supporting UNDRIP to the course he has now. And then bring it to sort of the week David Eby had, where I think, what you see in this shift, particularly on carbon tax and also on involuntary commitment, involuntary care. Are those flip-flops as you see them, Geoff?
Well, so let's working backwards from involuntary care, which is the most recent one, to the discussion we're having. I would say no. I mean, John Horgan sought to bring in a bill that was developed by Judy Darcy. She toiled over it for a long time. She was the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. And to cut these long story short, she was unable to get it across because the Green Party said they would vote against it. And they said they would vote against it because they were getting a lot of feedback from First Nations, the First Nations Leadership Council, and people in mental health advocacy that it was the wrong way to go for a whole bunch of ethical and moral reasons. So political reality set in, and that bill died. Then Minister Eby, now Premier Eby, in his leadership, said he wanted to revisit the issue. So there was no surprise there. He obviously supported the first bill. Then he said he would do it during his leadership. When he also said he would deal with the autism funding issue, which
but then he backed
reversed.
away from it after.
And then he backed off. He had received the same feedback. And we talk about hot coals. There is hot coals here on both sides. It's one of those issues where parents are torn to pieces because they can't protect their child who becomes addicted or has a mental illness or a combination of the two. And that's the most recent case that people are talking about, a young woman who died in a tent in Abbotsford. But this is a very complex issue. And I would say Premier Eby then went out and hired a guy named, suddenly his name escapes me, an eminent psychiatrist and physician, to purpose build an involuntary care program based on his own research. And that's what was unveiled on Sunday. And it's got three key pieces to it. There's lots to be sketched out. It's going to deal with people who have addiction. It's going to deal with people who have mental illness. And it also is going to deal with people who are physically disabled or cognitively disabled by repeated overdoses. Each of them, I think, has serious ethical and legal questions around it, which is why they've said they're going to need a bill. So what Eby's done here is take a position that is very familiar, that he's stated repeatedly, that the government has tried a couple of times, and he says, I'm seeking an election mandate on it, which is where it has to go.
Well,
and,
I think
and basically the Conservatives agree with that. They may be angry that he's saying it, but it's not a flip-flop.
Well,
The wobble?
I think this is an announcement on a Sunday before elections dropped. It doesn't smell good in terms of the motivations here. I mean, why wasn't this done 3 months ago? Why was
I have a theory about that. I won't satisfy you, but I'll try.
Okay. Well, I mean,
it was good. I think it was intended to be later in the week, and that gets us to the climate change thing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they had it all set up. One was not prepared. That was the climate change
Yeah.
one. There was a statement at a press conference on another topic.
Yeah, I mean, they're leaving themselves open to, even if everything was tickety-boo in terms of the process, everything behind this announcement, the way it rolls out makes it look like an election-style announcement that's in reaction to them being a bit on the run on this issue, especially after a violent incident downtown Vancouver in the last week and a half with the unfortunate murder and the other incident. That they look like they're responding to events rather than dictating events, and
Well, but
that's
I think
that's the politics
I
of
think
it.
there are reasons why that's the case, but I'm not going to say that it rolled out in a flawless way. The
Yeah.
execution was certainly impacted by the climate change
Is this
surprise
it,
of
like
Thursday or Friday.
But doesn't the how it rolls out matters more than the rationale? I think that's the hard thing. Like in terms of what it lands like in the minds of voters, was this a flip-flop or was this listening to voters? It's the delivery, I think, matters more than the rationale. And I think on the delivery on both these points, it's been tough because they're doing it in the 11th after being in government for so long at the 11th hour before an election's called.
Well,
It's tough.
I've given you the runway up to the involuntary care one. I mean, the government's been working on this for a long time in different scenarios. So I don't know when they expected to do it. Sunday is not the normal day for an announcement of that sort, but I think that was the context for
but
that was the climate change thing.
Yeah.
it the premier's leading these announcements. He's not
Mhm.
sending out another minister to talk about the carbon tax. He's not sending out the Adrian Dix or Jennifer Whiteside to deal with involuntary care. He's taking it on at the top, and I guess it remains to be seen whether that's the right or the wrong approach.
Mhm.
Because I mean
Mhm.
he's going to wear it or he's going to win it. But
Well, I
it
understand Jennifer Whiteside
I'm
has been dealing with a family medical issue. I don't know why, otherwise she wouldn't have been there. On the climate one, it's a fair point, but it's a massive statement because he was saying something different in the past. I think the funny thing about that one is that he's really the last person in Canada to change his mind, and he's being on this, and he gave some practical reasons for it. But he probably would have been better served to make the decision 3 or 4 months earlier. That said, it's the decision's made, and he's going to go forward and defend that. The difference between him and John Rustad on that score is that Rustad's not sure anything really needs to be done. And I thought the reality is the carbon tax that John Rustad supported when he was with Gordon Campbell and when he was with Christy Clark and when he was with Kevin Falcon did work in terms of keeping our emissions the same or lower while our economy expanded. And that was a big win. We also see much larger uptake of electric vehicles in other provinces and so on. And so his statement that the policies didn't work is just wrong. Whether people want them, whether they should continue is a separate question. But we've had success with the carbon tax. And perhaps that success was at an end. It doesn't look like we're going to find out, but it's not true to say it didn't produce any results. On the contrary, it did.
yeah.
Well, we'll have to see how it all shakes out in terms of whether these things are taking these issues off the table for the election or
Exactly.
whether they've impacted the
Reinvigorated
premier's
them.
brand, to
Yeah.
some
Mhm.
degree. I don't know what the answer to that is. I understand the rationale for doing these things to clear the decks, but it's just it can be a bit jarring when these things happen, when there's surprises, and that's the riskiness of it, I think.
Isn't it particularly risky for David Eby too? Because he's running on this like we can't take the risk of these conservatives. Like he's trying to be like the steady hand, and so it's particularly undermining to his own brand to be sort of last minute. I mean, again, I'll take your point, Geoff. It's not some kind of giant U-turn or anything, and even the carbon tax came with a bit of an asterisk on what the feds do. Like it's not, but it's hard. It's inconsistent with the brand they've been trying to build.
Well, I think that it's hard on both sides because I don't think John Rustad has a coherent position on any of these key questions. I mean, he starts with the statement that the province is basically a smoking crater, that people are clawing their way onto Air Canada flights. A third of the people are trying to leave, if another third want to leave. He paints a doomsday scenario, which I think people are angry about what's going on in many respects and they're frustrated, but I don't think people believe that the province has got its back to the wall in any particular way. And then his prescriptions, compared to the detail that's offered by Eby, and Eby would prefer to offer even more detail, I think. There is no detail. Like he doesn't have a climate plan, or he says he's going to have one. He's getting it from Andrew Weaver, who's now on his fourth political party, I guess. But the same thing on reconciliation, and so I think we'll see. The budget discussion was interesting too, because the budget is not a small problem. I don't think anybody would argue otherwise. But he has said that he will raise spending for healthcare in a transition to his new arrangement. But at the same time, he's talking about all these savings he'd like to identify, and the problems of the budget are quite significant and probably are going to require revenue increases somewhere along the way. And he's going to have to say what he would do on that front, as I think Premier Eby will.
All right. Well, I think we need to go and have a drink.
Hydrogen. We're hearing more and more about it all the time. Last time, I spoke about the early days of British Columbia's gas energy system going back to the 1860s. I also spoke about how our sponsor, FortisBC, is looking at new ways to move our energy system forward by working with farmers, local governments, industry, and Indigenous partners to develop renewable, low-carbon and gas projects right here in BC and elsewhere. Now, what does that look like in practice? Earlier this summer, FortisBC announced a funding agreement to support the development of hydrogen technology that would see zero-emission hydrogen and solid carbon being produced from natural gas at a low cost. FortisBC, through its Clean Growth Innovation Fund, is providing funding to VulcanX for the development of its proprietary technology. VulcanX is a company that was spun out from Merida Labs at the University of British Columbia and has developed the technology to separate natural gas into its components of hydrogen and solid carbon. That's way above my pay grade. Funds from FortisBC will be used to support the front-end engineering and detailed design of a potential facility capable of producing up to 1 ton of hydrogen per day. Now, why is FortisBC making this investment? Amendments to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction, Clean Energy Regulation empower utilities like FortisBC to help establish and grow the hydrogen sector in BC. Through the regulation, FortisBC can directly invest in hydrogen production as well as distributing it as an energy source. FortisBC believes that hydrogen has the potential to play a significant role in the lower carbon energy future and can help meet the energy needs of British Columbians while supporting the goals of the province's Clean BC strategy. FortisBC, energy for a better BC, and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
It's that time already?
It's that time already, and I'm going to say this is our last one before we go into a long series of mini short story episodes.
Our shots from here on in will be
high.
espresso only. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to the coffee bar.
We'll be going to the espresso bar next.
Yeah.
I'm one of the reasons I'm dressed up today is that I came from the service celebration of life for Bob Williams, Titanic member of the Barrett NDP administration from 72 to 75. He died a few weeks ago at the age of 90. So I want to raise a glass to him. It was a really interesting celebration of life at the Unitarian Church here in Vancouver, with people eulogizing him like Glenn Clark, the former premier, but also Tamara Vrooman, who was chair of Van City when Bob was on the board, and he was a critical leader in the development of Van City into the province's largest financial institution. And Al Atmansky, who may be familiar to some as someone who's done tremendous leadership in the disabilities community. So it was a great review of the remarkable life of Bob Williams, and I was glad to be able to go.
He was definitely a legend in BC politics.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about his book in the past. Remind me of the title, Geoff, the Bob Williams book.
It's got power in the title. I can't remember the rest
Power.
of it. Yeah.
Something power. Good read. Well, I've got a bit of a lazy one this week. I'll take a shot at the NDP for these policy changes, which we just talked about. So I'm kind of mowing my own lawn here. But I just think a week before the election to be in a position where you're perceived to be doing policy reversals is a tough place to be on the eve of an election. It looks a little too hurried. And I do think it's counter to the Premier's brand as a serious, policy-focused, intelligent guy. So proof will be in the pudding on that. But just from a strategic point of view, I think, maybe as of last week, that was the best choice they had. But I think the best choice was probably 3 or 4 months ago to map out the pre-writ period. And I don't feel like they've been mapping out the pre-writ period. I feel like they're skating all the way to the 21st here. So that's my take.
All right. And I did Google. Bob Williams's book is Using Power Well.
Correct.
There you go.
Thank you.
There we go. So
Yeah.
yeah, just to complete that. Okay. I'm going to raise my glass, and I'm going to raise my glass to the blessed independents running in this election who are about to spend, I'm sure, every minute of the next month knocking on doors. I want to raise my glass because that's, a bold undertaking. And I think it's a great moment to try it and to try and make history. I know that BC doesn't have a history of electing independents, but I want to offer a go for broke play, which comes from Kamala Harris's playbook, which she's got this sort of army of like 22-year-olds just like running stuff on TikTok for her with like full free reign. Why not? And I'm going to say why not, because, you are kind of, it is a long shot play to run as an independent, but also I think there's an opportunity for a conversation that independents can seize. That is, people are just kind of bothered in this election by feeling like they're feeling the sort of divisiveness of the discord, and they're feeling the sort of fever pitch of the discord, and they're looking for like the sort of calm adult somewhere near the center to go like, hey, and it's a story you're going to be able to tell not through the mainstream media. It's something you're going to be able to tell through organic, authentic, real socials. So go find a 22-year-old. I hear there's not enough jobs for them right now.
Maybe you should run as an independent. It's hammer time.
Hammer time. That would be my whole slogan.
Too obvious.
No, I'm with you guys. I'm the cowardly type. So no, thank you. I'm too busy running a podcast to run myself.
That's true. It's a full-time job.
Yeah, we're going to comment on it. But good luck to them. Go for broke. Seize the moment.
Yeah, I think we could see some surprises there. You never know. Some of them are very, very well-established people.
Yeah, which is exciting. And I think there's a great chorus and a great moment to be seized. So I look forward to watching it. All right. That's that's a great, it was really fun, Geoff and Mike, actually, to round out our leadership interviews. So thanks for joining us today. I want to thank our guest, John Rustad, for joining us at Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests, again and again and again. BC, you really can't leave now.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.